Hey, now then, welcome along to the Cult of Nick. My name's Nick Margerrison, and welcome to my cult. Right, so we're now going to have an interview with Alan Moore, and this is an interview which was done years ago. All of these things are taken from my archives, and well, I say years ago, I'm not quite sure. I think it was 2007, and it covers comic books, the occult, and then there's a separate interview done on the same day, which is about films, and it was done in anticipation of the Watchmen film, which hadn't come out at that point. And I did see it, and I will tell you what I thought of it right at the end of the podcast. Also, like I say, this is kind of two interviews in a way, so I'll give you some words in the middle. Oh, if you're a regular listener to the show and you've sent me correspondence or anything like that, we're going to skip that this week. We'll get to it next week. My plans for next week, I'll tell you about at the end of this massive podcast. Now, if this is too long as a podcast, listen, Joe Rogan gets away with 3 hours. Not that I'm comparing myself to him, but I'm just trying to work out exactly what the correct length for a podcast is at the moment. If this is too long for a podcast, right, you're a regular listener, you're a fully paid up member of the Cult of Nick, and you're listening to this and you're thinking, wow, how long can this guy go on for? This is rubbish, right? At me on Twitter, at Nick Margerrison is my Twitter tag, and say, Nick, that was too long. Never make them that long. Fine, I'll bear that in mind. This is an ongoing and evolving process. Anyway, I've waffled already too much. Let's have some Alan Moore. This is a great interview. Main reason I decided to post this is because it was his birthday over the weekend. Happy birthday, Alan, if you're listening, which I doubt you are because he doesn't use the internet, as he mentions in this epic interview. Right. As a kid, I had a book called The Watchmen. I must have been about 15, 16 years old. And it was this comic book that I was obsessed with and thought was brilliant. And on the back, it had a picture of the writer who wrote The Watchmen. And the writer was a long-haired, menacing bloke who was kind of glaring out of the shadows. And he was called Alan Moore. And I remember thinking, who the hell's that guy? And here he is, he's on the phone. Alan Moore, how's it going, man?
It's going fine, Nick, and I'm glad that you've got over your initial trepidation after seeing that photograph.
Yeah, man.
I can understand it.
But, I mean, describe yourself to the nation. You've got long hair. You're quite a scary-looking guy, aren't you?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, basically, my head is what happens to a male human head if you don't do anything to it for about 30 years.
Right.
How
long's your beard? You've got a long beard.
It's quite big. One of my daughter's friends said that it was big enough to hide a badger in.
Yeah.
Which I don't think there's a badger in there. But my beard, I was reading, there's an American satirical magazine called The Onion. Don't know if you've heard of it. It's very funny.
Uh-huh.
They brought out this book called The Onion World Atlas, which was a satirical atlas of the world. And on their section of Britain, they'd got various joke landmarks and locations, such as the place where the Queen lays her eggs and things like that. But down over Essex and Kent, it was just marked as Alan Moore's beard region.
Ah.
So apparently my beard has got a better PR person than I have.
It covers the whole of Essex there?
Apparently so. I'm getting a lot of sort of, drug wars and sort of drive-bys happening under my chin, even as we speak.
Oh, well, that's a treat, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, listen, this is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I kind of, whenever I think of you, I can never quite work out. In my mind, you're as famous as the Queen, right? But I can't ever work out. Are you more famous in America than you are in the UK? Because you were in The Simpsons, for example, weren't you?
Yeah, well, I don't really know. I don't really take much notice of that because since I never leave Northampton, or very seldom, then I don't, and the people here have had 55 years to get used to me, so they don't tend to make a real big thing of it, and I don't have to think, since I never go to America, I don't have to think about whether I'm famous there or not. Yeah, I think that probably, certainly at least in these last couple of hyped-up years, probably I'm more famous in America than I was, and probably more famous than over here. But I don't really need to be any more famous. I'm quite comfortable with the obscurity that I've managed to hang on to.
Well, let me ask you this question, right? It's Kerrang! It's the night before. We're talking to Alan Moore, right? This guy has written, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, brilliant comic book. From Hell, another brilliant comic book. V for Vendetta, another brilliant comic book. The Watchmen, another brilliant comic book. And as you're listening to me reading out these names, you may recognise a lot of these sort of have been turned into big time films. And as I'm talking to you, right, part of me's thinking that I'm talking to a guy who's tried to avoid mainstream fame despite, being tied to so many hugely successful stories.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's never been anything that interested me. The only reason that I got into the line of work that I ended up in was that I simply wanted to write. I wanted to write comics, and I wanted to write other things. That was the only thing that I was interested in. When I got into comics, you have to remember, this was a long time ago. In fact, I can remember that just when I was on the verge of getting into comics, I was down at the Sounds offices, which were down in Covent Garden, in Longacre. This was a music paper back in the 1960s, 70s, perhaps early 80s. And I was sitting a couple of chairs away from Jeff Barton, who was the heavy metal editor at the time, when he actually proposed Kerrang! The magazine.
Really?
So,
were you there when the pitch was happening?
Yeah, well, I mean, or I was certainly there when Jeff was, because he talked to me about the possibility of maybe having some comic strips in the early issues, which didn't quite work out. But, yeah, this was when I was doing a weekly comic strip for Sounds back in the day. And this was just before I kind of got into more mainstream comics, the stuff that I'm better known for. But back then, comics was nothing. There wasn't a more obscure profession on the face of the earth. Nobody was going to be, no one was interested in comic books. Most people were only dimly aware that there were people who wrote and drew them. If you wanted to be famous or successful or rich, the last job that you'd have wanted to go into was to be a comic book writer. It was purely because I wanted to write comics and to draw comics initially, that I got into the business. It was only, I kind of ruined all that.
Yeah,
because this pop star thing happened,
yeah, Let me chip in here and you're right. And I mean, I've been reading comic books since for as long as I can remember, and it's my favourite form of entertainment. I'm kind of an obsessive, geeky fan of comic books. And what happened in the sort of the late 80s, early 90s, people may remember there's this period when suddenly everyone started talking about how comic books were art, and suddenly they invented something called the graphic novel, which is the big, thick version of a comic book that you can buy in Waterstones and stuff like that. And that period happened largely because of your stories becoming so successful, and that there's no getting around that. That's what happened.
Yeah, and it was purely because I had found my way into comics, and I'd only been interested in doing better comics. That was what I was being paid to do. So I was looking for ways to make them more interesting to me. When I got snapped up by the Americans and put to work on things like Swamp Thing at first and then Watchmen, this was a great opportunity because I'd suddenly got a lot more room, I'd got colour, I'd got all of these things that you just didn't get in British comics. And somewhere in there, it seems that in creating Watchmen, something kind of unusual happened between me and Dave Gibbons that sort of, we suddenly realised around about issue 3 that we weren't just doing an interesting new take on the superhero, we were kind of changing the way that comic stories could be told, which was really exciting for us, probably not exciting for anybody else who were much more interested in all the strange superheroes, but we were interested in the storytelling of Watchmen. We were doing some breathtaking new things there that we'd never done before and that we hadn't seen anybody else done. And yes, that did draw a lot of attention into the comics industry, and you did get these things called graphic novels starting to appear. At the time, and I still feel this, but at the time I said that, look, wouldn't it be better to just call them big, expensive comics? Because that would be less pretentious, wouldn't it? And frankly, if you're going to call something a novel, then it better be a novel. It better have all the things that you'd expect from a novel, characters and a decent plot and a meaning. And frankly, the She-Hulk graphic novel is not going to do that.
Right.
You know, so...
Let me just explain. She-Hulk is like the Hulk, but it's a woman.
Yeah.
That's what She-Hulk is.
How difficult was that to think of?
So the She-Hulk graphic novel, for anyone who doesn't know what that would be all of the copies of She-Hulk monthly put into a book, and they'd say, there you go, there's the graphic novel, and it wouldn't be changed at all.
That's basically it. And it would be called a graphic novel. So this was all getting very inflated. And at the time, I was a much younger man. It was quite exciting to sort of think that, yes, I was getting this exposure for me work. So at the very beginning, I sort of was prepared to go along with this to a degree. Looking back as an older, sadder and wiser man, I can remember that at that time there were hundreds of newspaper headlines that were generally saying, "Bam sock, pal, comics aren't just for kids anymore."
Yeah.
Now, actually, looking back, I think that they were completely misguided. It's sort of what happened back in the 80s, what looked like it was going to be some huge renaissance of comics, and which the marketing departments all played up as if it was a renaissance for comics because it was selling more books for them. But what really happened was you got 2 or 3 people who happened to do good books at the same time. And in the case of Watchmen, which is still apparently the only comic book that is regarded, it was the only one on that Time magazine list of important novels of the 20th century. It was the only graphic novel on the list. Watchmen, it kind of changed things around, but what it really did was there were a lot of superhero fans out there. When I was writing comics, when I started writing them, I'd have said that my average audience would have been, say, between about 13 and 18. Mm. And that was a bit older than it had been even a few years before that. But what I think happened in the 80s was that a lot of people who were in their 20s or 30s, and who had always had a nostalgic yearning for the superheroes of their childhood, but had always been embarrassed about being seen reading a comic on a bus because it would make them look childish and not very cool at all. All of a sudden, that all changed in the mid-1980s. All of a sudden, comics and graphic novels were this new style accessory. It was kind of fashionable. So all the people who really did just want to read She-Hulk could now be seen doing it on the tube without fear of ostracization or social embarrassment, because the companies were all claiming that comic books had grown up. We hadn't really grown up. There were a few books where people were trying to push things forward. But what really happened was that the rest of culture had grown down. And I think that it was around the 80s that it suddenly became okay to do something geeky like reading comics.
But hang on, let me just chip in. Right? Your comic books, they are layered and they're structured and they're intelligent, and there's no getting round that. I mean, they are quite. There's no getting around it. They're adult.
Well, absolutely, and I think that has caused more problems for the comics industry than it's actually solved. Because, I mean, like you say, there's no getting around it. And I think that is the problem for a lot of the American comics industry, is that this work, which took things a lot further than anybody had taken them at that time or since, suddenly arrived in the middle of the comics landscape, and I intended it to be something that would open the doors for people, that would enable comics creators to think, hey, you could use all these new ideas. We don't have to do comics the same old way. We could use our own ideas. We could try new things. But I don't think that's what Watchmen did. It kind of, at best, it kind of inspired a lot of pretentious and gloomy works that came after it. And I think to some degree it's provided a massive psychological stumbling block that the comic industry has not been able to get round in the, God knows, almost 25 years since I first started writing the first issue of Watchmen.
What did you? I mean, with Watchmen, I want to talk about some of your other stuff in a minute. But with Watchmen, for anyone who's not read it, and I strongly recommend that they read it, particularly before this film comes out. But the thing about the Watchmen is that actually kills off the idea of a superhero. That's what that book does. And at the end of it, when you finish it, I remember, and I was only maybe like 15 or 16, putting it down and thinking, all those other superhero books don't make any sense anymore, because that was the end of it. And I think you're right. And comic books haven't really ever recovered, have they?
No, I don't think they have. And I didn't intend Watchmen to be a death blow. Although, in a sense, when we were doing it, I remember thinking that maybe they should just stop publishing superhero comics after Watchmen, because it's funny you should say what you just said, because I remember at the time, I think, talking to Neil Gaiman, who back then hadn't even begun his comic writing career, but and I think we were agreeing that in a fair and just world, probably they would just stop publishing superhero comics after Watchmen, although we knew that wasn't going to happen.
But they don't. That's the thing, because the Watchmen does actually make the superheroes people, and then at the end of it, you do feel they I think themselves, the characters, feel a bit silly being superheroes, and at the end of the book, you do think, oh right, yeah, I suppose if you put that in the real world, it doesn't make sense. Do you think? Let me ask you this question, right? What do you think would be the best book for someone to read if they wanted an introduction to your work?
It'd be depending upon the person. There'd be a lot of different books. I've covered quite a bit of ground. I mean, for people who just enjoy comedy, there's the Bo Jeffries is probably the funniest thing I've ever done. Mm-hmm. And that will be coming out probably sometime next year. We're going to be bringing out a whole collection with a new story that features this mutated Midlands family, the Bo Jeffries, in a context of a world, the world of today, with Big Brother and reality TV and all of the other blights upon the landscape. For people who probably go for the more dramatic or perhaps superhero-oriented stuff, well, there's quite a lot of them. Watchmen would probably be a good one, because that would introduce people to the kind of, I think that, you know, my stuff, if I say so myself, it does have quite a bit of depth. And I think that Watchmen would be a good example of that, if people wanted to find out how I kind of do things. or at least how I did things then.
What do you think of V for Vendetta as a way in? Because that book to me is a real clear story.
Well, absolutely. I think that back at the time when I'd just finished V for Vendetta and I'd got that and Watchmen, I remember thinking that Watchmen was probably a book with more intellectual weight than V, perhaps, that it had got more head. But I thought that V for Vendetta had probably got more heart. That there was some quite passionate stuff in there that had resulted from back in the early 80s, back when I was still, I think, contributing to Sounds and was writing the V for Vendetta strip for Warrior, which was an independent magazine back at that time. I can remember that this was at the time before the Falklands War, when Margaret Thatcher had been in office for 2 or 3 years and it was all going horribly wrong. There were riots breaking out all over the country in previously riot-free areas. The National Front, as they were then called, were on the rise. There were a lot of anti-Nazi League and Rock Against Racism sort of concerts and processions to counteract the rise of fascism. And this all somehow found its way into V for Vendetta. I kind of projected it all, what was then an inconceivable distance into the future, into the far future of 1997, as I remember, where I thought, what would be a good way to let people know that we're talking about a fascist police state here, where everybody's under surveillance. I thought, I know, if I put surveillance cameras on every street corner, that would look really brutal and fascistic, which it did back from a perspective of 1982. Coincidentally, I think it was 1997 when the Labour government got into power and when they started to introduce the widespread use of surveillance cameras, which now, of course, blanket most of the urban areas of the country.
Yeah, well, they're everywhere now, and that's one of the strange things about reading V for Vendetta, is it doesn't seem very far-fetched at all, that kind of, it's kind of an Orwellian state where there's security cameras everywhere, and it doesn't look that far removed from the world that we live in.
Yeah, well, I sometimes wonder whether some of those goons in the Labour Party were fans of mine back in the 80s, and they thought, oh, this is a good idea.
Yeah,
all of this stuff in V for Vendetta, that'd be cool. Well, so I might have a lot to answer for. I don't know.
It's possible. One of the things that I want to ask you is, like I say, I remember, reading The Watchmen, being aware of your work, and then you kind of, in my world, you sort of vanished from the radar, and I remember hearing you were writing a book about the Ripper, and thinking, oh, what's happened? Oh, maybe like he's gone mad, and he's just vanished or died or something. And then I remember hearing that you decided that you believed in magic and you were going to worship a serpent god. Is that true? Do you believe in?
That is a rough approximation of the truth. What happened was that I had become, just after Watchmen, I'd become completely disgusted with the behaviour of the big comic companies, who, in my opinion, have been ripping off creators since they bought the rights to Superman for something like $35 back in the late 30s. So I'd cut my connections with them, and I wanted to kind of get away from superheroes. So I'd started to work upon a number of projects which took a long time to complete. One of them was the Jack the Ripper book, From Hell. Another one was Lost Girls, the erotic work that I completed with Melinda Gebbie just a couple of years ago. And I was a long way away from mainstream comics, wasn't really concerned with them, and I was pursuing my own interests. And around my 40th birthday, a number of things came to a head. I mean, for one thing, I'd had a few beers on the actual evening, as I remember. But I decided that approaching 40, I'd kind of got a choice. Looking at friends of mine who'd turned 40, it seemed that the most popular option was to have some sort of midlife crisis. And which just sounded boring, really. It sounded like it would be, particularly for me friends, you know. I thought that a more attractive option would be, rather than just having a midlife crisis, would be to go spectacularly mad and declare that I had become a magician.
Right.
Just for the look on people's faces as much as anything at first. Although, that's been a bit glib about it. I'd been thinking about magic. I'd been interested in it as a sort of a subject matter for fantasy stories for a long time, ever since I was a child. But I'd been put off of the field of the occult mainly because of the kind of people that you tend to meet in occult shops. Or back at that time, you kind of got the impression that these were people who hadn't got perhaps an awful lot going on in their lives and were trying to fill the gap with some sort of pretense at secret knowledge or special powers. That put me off. But I'd started to have a look at some of the more heavyweight occult thinkers, people like Queen Elizabeth I's court magician and astrologer, Dr. John Dee, who was a genius. He invented the British Empire. He was the reason why we were a massive sea power. He wrote incredible books upon mathematics. He contributed to science so that if he hadn't been there, Newton couldn't have done all of his scientific work upon which our entire modern scientific landscape is based. Dee was absolutely vital.
So what was his role in the court?
He was Queen Elizabeth I's advisor and astrologer. And, I mean, if you want to puzzle Americans, a really good way to do it is to ask them just exactly why they had to have their war of independence against the British. Whoever told them that the British owned America? And actually the answer to that is John Dee. He had gone in to Queen Elizabeth and he'd said, I've been looking at these ancient legends about a Prince Madog from Wales who, with a bunch of druids, had crossed the seas and had actually landed in America. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, and neither did Dee. But he said it doesn't really matter. With this, we can claim that Your Majesty actually owns the New World, as they called it then. And he said, in fact, this could be the first of many such territories, which I suppose you could call a kind of British Empire. He was the first person to use the term.
Wow.
Now, he did all of this stuff. He is pivotal to the whole of society. But he also spent a good half of his life trying to transcribe the language of creatures that he had to call angels. If he'd called them anything else, he would have been in big trouble. He was in quite a lot of trouble as it was. The entities of some sort that he believed that his scryer, this is somebody who looks into a fortune teller's crystal ball or a black mirror and sees images. He believed that his scryer, Edward Kelly, was actually passing on these visions and precise instructions from these entities, which Dee, like I say, had to call angels. Although the descriptions of them, they're not like the angels you get on Christmas cards. They're a bit weird. Now, I wasn't prepared to dismiss an intellect such as John Dee's as being just foolish, deluded. So I thought maybe I should start to pay magic some serious attention. This all culminated in this drunken night on my 40th birthday, where I declared that I was going to become a magician. The next day, when I'd sobered up, I realised that I'd said that out loud where other people could hear it, and that I was now going to have to do something about it or look really stupid. So I decided that the best thing to do would be to change my entire life rather than look really stupid, and to go for it. And so I started some investigations as to what this stuff might be about, what it might all mean. On a rational, I hope, level. Something that made sense to me. And I had a couple of experiences that convinced me that, yes, there was something to this.
You had a couple of magical experiences.
Yeah.
You had experiences with the supernatural.
Yeah, although not the kind of thing that you could really see, was it Derek Cora or someone like that investigating. I mean, basically, what you have to understand is that the magical state is one that human beings have been trying to get into by various different methods since we were in the caves. Drumming, repetitive ritual drumming, is one way that you can get people into this kind of necessary trance state. Another, there's meditation. In some cases, might be a good way to get somebody in to this trance-like state. Some people have used sexual techniques. A lot of people have used drugs, generally psychedelic drugs. But varying means, music or dance, all of these things that put your head into a different space. You can even use writing to actually move your head, or creative art to move your head into a different space. Now, this is where magic happens. It only happens in your head. And we are conditioned to think of things that happen in our head as not being real. Whereas, in fact, they are. It's just, there's a confusion that all of us live in two worlds at once, and we think we live in one. The thing is, we have the solid world, where there are solid tables and solid chairs. And yeah, that's there, that's real. We can't deny that. This is the world that our bodies are in and which we live in every day. We also have the world of our thoughts, in which there are the ideas of chairs.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know which is the most important. Certainly the physical world is quite important, but if you were to get rid of all the chairs in the world for some reason, which I can't think of at the moment, but if you were, as long as you still had the idea of a chair, then we'd all have somewhere comfortable to sit down. The idea of a thing is actually often more important than the thing itself. And that landscape of ideas that we call consciousness is a world. And I think that magic is a different way of engaging with that world than the way in which we normally do in normal everyday life.
Right. So what you're saying to me, let me just try and recap on that and check that I've got it right, is imagine if we'd got rid of all of the chairs in the world, the fact that you and I can conceive of a chair means that we could always make one.
Absolutely.
And so magic is the thinking part of our minds. It's the bit where that's where magic happens, inside the realm of ideas.
Inside the realm of ideas. Now, you do get, of course, if you're talking about magic, then people will say, well, so what about demons then? Now, I mean, one of the magical experiences that I mentioned was an accidental encounter with something that appeared to be an entity and which appeared to be a demon. Or at least that's what it said it was.
Well, you met a demon?
Yeah, in my head. But it's difficult to describe this. Just because a thing happens in the world of ideas, in the world inside your head, that doesn't mean it isn't real. you can have some very strange experiences, which is what most of magic is trying to describe. I was in the trance-like state that you need to be in order to, that you need to be in order to work certain sorts of magic. And I suddenly found myself assailed by a load of really unpleasant ideas that didn't seem to be coming from me.
So you're kind of meditating at this point?
Well, yeah, I guess you could call it that. You know, I was, like I say, I was in a different state of mind. And which, of course, all of this stuff on some level was a hallucination. I mean, there were other people present who did, being in similar states of mind, were also able to perceive in different ways the same entity that I was having contact with. Now, I mean...
And this is after you've decided to become a magician?
This is after I've decided to become a magician. This was one of the early experiences that convinced me that there was something to this. Now, I mean, if, at the risk of boring you, or your listeners, perhaps I should describe this event a bit more fully. What had happened was that on the night in question, we'd been attempting a sort of a magical ritual, but it had been a kind of half-assed affair. It hadn't gone particularly well. I'd retired upstairs in a very bad mood. I was feeling very angry, which is unlike me. I was feeling angry at the way that the other people involved in the ritual had not taken it as seriously as I had. I was getting quite petulant. When I got upstairs on my own, I suddenly started to have all of these feelings of just what a fraud I was, what a ridiculous creature I was, all of this believing in magic, all of this ridiculous sham, that who did I think I was? What a pathetic specimen. And this was really overpowering. It was like all of the worst self-doubts that I've ever had in my life, and a lot that I haven't, all at once. And I suddenly thought, where is this coming from? This isn't actually coming from me. This is, and at that point I thought, is this some sort of entity? And at that moment, the word demon popped into my mind. And all of a sudden, I was in a fierce struggle with something that was almost palpable. In actual physical reality, I was laying upon my then fiancée, now wife's, four-poster bed. A nice little wooden four-poster bed that she'd just got. And I was trying to get rid of whatever it was that seemed to be attacking me on some sort of psychological level. At one point, I realized that I was going to have to do this physically. Even though there was nothing tangible, I was somehow going to have to push this thing out of my reality. Because
I would have been, if I had been you, I would have been terrified.
Yeah, well, I had an initial moment of terror, which was part of the self-loathing, the fear. Once I'd thought the word demon, yes, all of those fears washed over me, but I decided the only way to deal with it was to behave sternly. I'd heard in my readings that one must act sternly with demons. So I tried to push this thing out of our reality. I stuck my hand. I could see a kind of a pattern of green and red coloured diffused lights. Nothing more than that. Floating above my head as I lay there. And I pushed my hand into that and had a sensation of like like if you stuck your hand into a big pot full of cold spaghetti. I had to more or less wind this substance around my hand in some way, like winding it onto a fork, shoving it out of our dimension. I don't know what I was thinking. I was in quite a state, as you can perhaps imagine.
And you could see these sort of colours, so you're putting your hands
glittering
into...
lights.
Yeah.
I could, whether I was perceiving it with an inner eye, yes, I must have been. I'm not saying that there were glittering lights in the room that anybody else could have seen. No, that would be ridiculous. I'm just telling you about what I was experiencing. And I pushed this thing away. It was a tremendous physical effort. I'd got one hand holding the bedpost. I think this was the point at which Melinda came into the room, and the whole bed was shaking with the muscular effort that I was trying to exert to push this thing out of our space-time continuum, or whatever I was thinking.
Uh-huh.
This seemed to work. It seemed to suddenly be gone. An atmosphere lifted in the entire room, and I explained to Melinda what I thought had just happened, and she said that, yes, she noticed that all of a sudden things were different. Our two friends who were stopping over and were sleeping downstairs, I suddenly felt incredibly sorry for having felt angry with them earlier, because they had been behaving in a very disturbed fashion. I ran downstairs in my dressing gown to see if they were all right, and they said, yeah, we are now. And I said, well, when did it stop being bad for you? And they said, oh, about a minute or two ago. And I said, I think it was a demon. I think I've just got rid of it. I'll let you know how this turns out. Left them to a peaceful night's sleep in a completely changed atmosphere to the one that had assailed us earlier. Then I went back upstairs and was talking with Melinda about it, and she said, so you think it's gone now? And I kind of felt almost like as if someone had trailed a fingernail up my spine. And I thought, no, it's not gone, but it's too far away to do us any harm, but perhaps it's not far enough away so that we can't talk to it. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to actually learn something, at least about how my own mind works.
Right. Did you talk to it?
Yes. I thought it best to be respectful of it, to not approach it with fear or hatred or any presuppositions of evil. I thought I'd try and talk to it the same as I'd try and talk to anybody, on its own level, basically. And so I said, you are a fine... I said this out loud in a room where there was just Melinda present. I said, you are a fine and mysterious creature. What might you be exactly? And this voice inside my head, which didn't seem to be my voice, although maybe it was part of my personality that was somehow personified as a separate voice, or maybe it was some sort of external entity. But this voice said, I am one of the 9 dukes. I repeated this to Melinda, and she said, what are the 9 dukes? And I said, I've no idea. I said, I don't think I've ever heard the phrase before. I think that it might mean the 9 dukes of hell, or 9 infernal dukes, or something like that.
Right.
I don't know. I'm just passing on what it's just said to me. And I said, okay, which one are you? And this kind of rich, amused voice said, you'll have to guess. And I was already starting to form quite a liking for this entity. It sounded like the kind of entity that you probably would enjoy a night down the pub with.
I'm not sure I would.
Well, I said, all right, okay, I've got to guess. I've got to play a guessing game. I said, are you one of the ones that begins with B? I said, is it you, Belial? I was just picking names that I'd heard that related to demons. And I was in quite a confused state, so I perhaps wasn't thinking that straight. But I said, is it you, Belial? And I got this vision of a toad, a gigantic toad, quite beautiful in its way, made entirely out of diamonds, which on its brow had a ring of 7 eyes. And it had a very aloof expression on its face. And I thought, yeah, this is probably Belial, but this is not what I'm talking to. The whole vibe of the thing was different. This is something inscrutable that wouldn't be as kind of warm and friendly as the thing that I'm talking to. So no, it's not Belial.
So Belial is a demon.
Is a demon. It doesn't look like that in anybody else's account of it, but that is what I saw. So I next I gave a guess. I said, still on the letter B, I said, is it you, Beelzebub? Which is a name that anybody could remember in terms of demons and devils.
It's a name for the devil, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of the names of the devil. So, Beelzebub, is it you? At that point, I saw an infinite wall made of pink-grey hog flesh with white bristles jutting from it at intervals. It was impossible to judge the scale of this thing, but it looked immense. And the wall was studded all over it, from end to end, from top to bottom, with these glaring, hate-filled eyes. It was horrific. It was the most horrific thing that I've ever seen, a wall of eyes. And they were all glaring in absolute bestial hatred. And I thought, right, this is not what I'm talking to either. This is something much too big and forceful. So perhaps I'm on the wrong track with the letter B.
So it was showing you pictures?
It was pictures, images. I got my eyes closed at this point.
And it was showing you pictures of the devils and demons that you're suggesting?
Forms, and I was somehow sensing, no, this is not the right mood for the thing that I'm talking to. So I decided to try the letter A. And I said, is it you, Asmodee? And this voice said, yes. And I reported this to Melinda. I said, it says its name is Asmodee. And she said, is that an actual demon's name? And I said, look, at the moment, I'm a bit confused. I don't know whether I've just made it up or whether I've, got it from somewhere else. And then after a while, I thought, yes, it's more commonly known as Asmodeus. It's the same root name. It's the same demon, but just with the Roman name for it, where they like to have an us on the end of everything, was Asmodeus.
So who
one
is
of the
Asmodeus?
big demons. And so I thought, all right, well, I've got an introduction. I've guessed his name.
But who is Asmodeus? I don't know who. I've never heard of
Well,
Asmodeus.
he's first mentioned there's a book of the Bible. In the Apocrypha of the Bible, there's a book called the Book of Tobit, where it explains that a princess of ancient Persia was once, the demon Asmodeus fell in love with this human princess from ancient Persia. And when he proposed to her, she was so terrified by his appearance that she ran away from him and immediately got engaged to another bloke. Asmodeus apparently didn't take this very well. And on her wedding night, he killed her groom. And she immediately got engaged again. And he killed the next one, and the next one, and the next one. You'd have thought that she'd have got the idea by now, but no, she carried on. And this carried on until he'd killed 7 of her grooms, at which point she had a wizard or some sort of sorcerer burn fish guts and perfume and perform some sort of exorcism which drove Asmodeus into the land of Egypt. So he was no more problem for the Persians. Now, this is all stuff I found out later. At the time, I was talking to something which I got the impression, if it was real, if it was a real entity, made of ideas, something that only existed in that realm of ideas, then it was something that, in our terms, was thousands of years old. And yet I found it, like I say, very gentlemanly. I asked if I could see it. I said, would it be possible to see what you look like? And at that point, I got this spectacular vision. If you can imagine if you will, that 360 degrees around your head, there is a moving lacework made up of spiders. Luminous, beautifully coloured spiders that are turning themselves inside out in some kind of, through a dimension that we don't have, they're turning themselves inside out and becoming a beautiful lacework of lizards. Then back to the spiders again. And somehow in all of this, there is a fan of beautiful peacock tail feathers. It was exquisite, bit creepy, bit hellish,
Yeah.
but beautiful in its way, jeweled and beautiful. And I kind of got the impression that, well, actually, these things don't look like anything. They're just ideas. So, in a sense, what we perceive them as, it's like we're dressing them up from the wardrobe of our mind. Their bodies are like suits of clothes that we put on them so that we can see them. But I spent an enjoyable half an hour, I don't know how long it was, in conversation with this entity until it all sort of drifted away. The ritual concluded, and the next day I checked it all out. I mean, one of the things that I'd said during my conversation with this entity was that it seemed to be, it was a bit of a show-off. It was beautifully artistic, and it was also very, very good at mathematics. That it had got one more dimension at least than the three that we are used to, and it seemed to be enjoying showing off that fact.
Well, hang on a minute. Let me just explain that. So, dimensions, you have forward, backwards, left, right, up, down.
Well, there are three dimensions. There is height, there is breadth, and there is depth. Well, length, breadth, and depth. The three dimensions of a cornflakes packet.
Yeah.
Now, this seemed to have at least four dimensions. One that we don't normally see. We're told by Einstein and other physicists that we do inhabit a fourth dimensional universe, but the fourth dimension is not visible to us. This creature seemed to have no problem with it at all, and it was quite acrobatic in turning itself inside out into these beautiful, sinister, flowering patterns of lizards and spiders, with lots of eyes all staring at you. But it was quite an interesting experience. And the next day, when I thought, all right, I'm going to check out Asmodeus. I'm going to look at the literature, because I wasn't that familiar with the name. And I found out that he is a demon that is associated with mathematics.
Right.
And also with handicraft, which was exactly the impression that I'd got of him. I also found out that he is one of the few demons that you have to ask his name before he will talk to you. This is according to the Key of Solomon, allegedly written by King Solomon himself thousands of years ago, although he probably didn't exist. But sort of, it was quite eerie. There was also a reference in Shakespeare to Asmodeus. There's something called an Asmodeus flight. This was said to be when the demon Asmodeus could pick you up and fly you up in the sky so that you could look down on your neighbours' houses and see what they were doing as if the roof had vanished. And you could see what all your neighbours were doing inside their houses from up in the sky. And this was something that Asmodeus would do for you if you commanded him to. Now, I did a picture of Asmodeus as I'd seen him. It was an elaborate crayon drawing. I think they're going to use it on the cover of a book that will be coming out sometime soon. But the lacework of spiders that I described. I mean, I'm not that good an artist, so it probably wasn't that good a picture. It probably didn't do him justice, you know. But I was describing it to my colleague Dave Gibbons. This was some years ago. This was back in the 95, something like that, 94, 95. And I was talking with Dave Gibbons, who at that time was very interested in the actual mathematics of fourth dimensional space, and had got a really interesting book upon some computer simulations of fourth dimensional space. And I was explaining to him, I had explained to him just what this creature looked like, this lace of spiders, which was, and the picture that I'd done had got, it's basically the same spider at lots of different sizes, so that it looks like it's coming towards you from a distance in staggered images, with the closest one being the largest. It's a strange sort of, it's one image of one creature, one spider, that is duplicated at different sizes into a kind of a lacework. That's what my picture looked like. Dave had just read this book upon fourth dimensional maths, and at the end of the book, the author had been asked what a fourth dimensional life form might look like. And just for he wasn't being really serious. He says, well, I'm not saying there are fourth dimensional life forms, and we can't probably imagine what they'd look like, but my best guess is that such a life form would appear to us as a kind of lacework of multiple images of itself at different scales. And David read that and had read had heard what I showed him the picture that I'd done. So he phoned me up and said that had actually put a bit of a shiver up his spine when he'd read that, because it was so close to a description of my picture. And, of course, when I'd had a think about that Asmodeus flight thing a bit more, if I took you up in the sky, then how does that work, that you can look down on people's houses and see the people inside them? I mean, they say that the roof is gone, but you surely have to get rid of their bedroom floor as well. Sounds a bit unlikely to me. However, if I hadn't taken you up in the sky, but if I'd taken you up into the fourth dimension, into a higher dimension than the one that we are currently in, then it would make perfect sense. I mean, if you imagine, say there were two-dimensional creatures, completely flat things that inhabit a flat world. They can't imagine three-dimensional things like us. But they probably live in houses where it's just a square drawn on a piece of paper. To them, they are enclosed on all sides because they've only got two dimensions to think about: forward and back, left and right. Mm. Now, to us, looking down, we can see in through the top of that square through a dimension that they don't have. We can see the little flat people in their two-dimensional world inside their squares. They don't know how we can do it because they can't imagine three-dimensional reality. Just the same for us, if there were fourth dimensional beings, if they could take us up into the fourth dimension and have us look down upon people's houses, we would be seeing into those houses through a dimension which we don't usually have access to. We would be seeing around the walls and the roof. In fact, I've done quite a lot of research upon the fourth dimension. If I've read it correctly, if we were to look at people from a fourth dimensional perspective, we would be able to see the muscle and bone inside their bodies. We would be able to see the marrow inside the bone. We would be able to see around the corner of everything, a corner that isn't normally there for us from a three-dimensional perspective. And this is the Asmodeus flight as described in Shakespeare. And that seemed to fit in with this mathematically superior, extra-dimensional entity that, in my wild, delusory, hallucinatory fantasy, I had imagined that I had talked to. It seemed to be accurate information from an hallucination. Now, in terms of ordinary science, that cannot possibly happen. And your initial question, you said that I'd started worshipping a snake.
Yeah.
Yeah, this happened to me in my first magical... When I first started to get into magic, I spoke to my great friend, Steve Moore, no relation, who was the guy who got me into writing comics, got me into magic, and is generally responsible for ruining my life, but my greatest and oldest friend. And I said, how should I go about this? And he said, well, perhaps if you were to choose a god, or let a god choose you, and then let that be the focus for your studies and your attempts to feel your way into this territory. He'd always got on very well with the Greek moon goddess, Selene.
Right.
But I'd got to find one of my own. And at this point, I was shown a photograph of the 2nd century Roman snake god, Glykon, who is one of the most rock and roll gods that you can possibly imagine. He's got long blonde hair. He's got semi-human features. I mean, a snake with hair like Iggy Pop.
Right.
I mean, that is fantastic. And there was something so absurd and so beautiful and so wise-looking about this photograph of a statue that Steve showed me, that I thought, yeah, that is the kind of God that I could probably get along with. I like his look. I like the style. I like the attitude.
So you picked him, and you worshipped him, and you chatted with Azarus, and man, that's a head-battering story. There's no getting around that.
Well, yeah, this was I've done a lot of other things since then. This was back during my first year of magic. And even if these things only happened inside my head, they have enriched my intellectual life considerably. They gave me, I believe, the ability to handle... I mean, one of the things, when I started getting into magic, because I'm a rational person, and I said to those around me, friends and loved ones, I said, look, I don't know what I'm getting into here. It's kind of interesting to me, but I obviously don't want to go mad. That seems to be the most clear and present danger. So if I look like I'm going mad, perhaps you should intervene. And they said, yeah, but how will we know if you've gone mad?
Yeah, what would the signs be?
Yeah, and I said, yeah, that is a kind of a problem with me. I can see that, because it's not like I'm suddenly going to be... People are going to say, yes, he's behaving and looking a bit eccentric. No, that's not going to happen with me. I probably already look about as mad and act about as mad as people can comfortably imagine. So what I decided was that, all right, maybe if I'm happy perhaps, but then I thought, no, that doesn't work, because you can be drawing on the wall in your own feces and be completely happy.
Mm.
Happiness is not an indication of sanity. So I decided that what it came down to was functionality. I said, if my work appears to be suffering, either in its quantity or its quality, that is the time when you should suggest to me strongly that I stop this. If I haven't already sorted that out for myself. But that wasn't what I found. I found that because, to me, magic is all about consciousness, and it's all about creativity. I believe that any creative act is an act of magic. To me, magic is all about, on one level, it's a rabbit from a hat, something out of nothing. But as somebody who works with ideas every day of their working life, I have often faced that thing of the question, where do you get your ideas from, Mr. Moore? And I've been stuck for an answer. And the fact is that none of us creative people have got any idea where we get our ideas from. It is a rabbit out of a hat. It is something out of nothing. Out of an empty mind comes a vague idea for a superhero story, and then somehow that turns into Watchmen, and there are massive piles of it in the books and record shops of the land. Something has come from not even an idea, from nothing, to becoming a physical thing in a sizable number of people's homes in real life. That, to me, is a magical process. And you could say the same about anything, any work of art, any work of creation. You could say the same about the entire universe coming into being out of a quantum vacuum. To me, this is what magic is about. It's about understanding my creativity, understanding how it works, how it all links up, so that I don't have to have writer's blocks or grasp for ideas. And the first fruits of becoming involved in magic were basically, the ABC line of comics, where I was writing 5, 6 books at once.
Yeah, you see, that's a really strange thing. I mean, to hear you say this, it's making me think, right, as soon as I've finished talking to him, I'm going to go off, I'm going to get into magic, and that's what's going to happen. But then at the same time, I don't want to bump into any demons, man. That's hardcore. I don't want to, that's scary.
Well, what I'm doing for all of you wusses who want to get into magic but don't want to bump into any demons, what I'm doing currently with Steve Moore is we are working upon a book called The Moon and Serpent Bumper Book of Magic. And we're doing it so that it's going to be absolutely beautiful. There's a real sense of humour in the illustrations and the way we're presenting it visually. Do you remember those old chemistry sets and Meccano sets that they used to do back in the 50s and 60s, where they'd always have, this would probably be well before your time, but they'd have pictures of smiling middle-class children in nice red woolly jumpers beaming as they sort of looked at test tubes and Bunsen burners.
Yeah, chemistry sets, man.
A cosy sort of 1950s illustration style, So what we're doing is having the same illustration kind of style with these rosy-cheeked children, but they're, conjuring Beelzebub in the middle of a pentacle or something. It's going to be quite funny.
Oh, man, I'm into that. Do you know what? When that happens, you've got to come on the show. You've got to tell us about it, and I'll have one. But I don't want any demons.
Well, what we're doing actually, Nick, is to sort of. It's going to be a big book. It's not going to be ready for a couple of years, but in a very clear and straightforward way, we're going to try and explain exactly what magic is, exactly how it relates to the normal life that you are living, the theory of it. We've got a section of things to do on a rainy day, which is just explaining in a very comforting style exactly how to get into the magical state and things to do when you're in that state. Suggestions, which we hope will be clear and will give everybody the chance to explore the world of magical ideas. And if they don't want to encounter demons, there's plenty of ways of making sure that that doesn't happen. You don't allow demons into your reality if you don't feel like it. Yeah. We're going to explain what we think they are, how we think it all works, and hopefully we'll do it in a way that reflects what magic is to us, because magic isn't some big, gothy, scary thing.
It sounded a bit scary when you were telling me about it.
There's an element of scariness in it, but it's scary, it's exciting, it's profound, it's as deep as anything. It's colourful, it's beautiful, it's occasionally really funny. And we want to kind of reflect all of those things in this beautifully illustrated bumper book of magic. Coming to a shop near you in a couple of years' time, if we're lucky.
I'm looking forward to it. It's Kerrang! It's the night before. Alan Moore joining us on the show. Thanks for joining us on the show. It's been mad to talk to you. And yeah, thanks for being with us, man.
Hey, my pleasure, Nick. It's been a pleasure to be on the show.
Couple of things to mention here. Firstly, it's my personal belief that Alan Moore is one of the only bona fide living geniuses on planet Earth. In that, I know enough about comic books to spot a genius when one walks onto the stage, right? The metaphorical stage. And here are some of the qualities of a genius. First of all, a genius produces something that is entirely unique and new, right? Alan Moore did that without question with The Watchmen. And then, in truth, Promethea, which is possibly a better comic book than The Watchmen, how's about that for controversial? That's point one. He's invented something new and unique. Point two, he's popular. Geniuses are recognisable by everybody. It's not like, all right, sometimes you get the tortured genius who no one catches on to. Fine. But at some point, people have to recognise your genius. You can't, you can't be and remain an undiscovered genius and seriously lay claim to the title. It just doesn't work like that. And he's popular. He's popular on a massive scale within his field of comic books. He's the biggest name in comics. No mucking about. That's the reality. He's bigger than Stan Lee. He's bigger than what he is. He is. He's, one of the biggest names in comics. And then the final quality, which I find fascinating, is generally what happens with genius or genii is they come along, they do their thing, and then the medium in which they've displayed their genius spends ages in the doldrums trying to deal with what's just happened. I'll give you an example. Shakespeare. Shakespeare comes along, does his stuff, blows people away, and then, in fairness, the whole of the world of theatre spends a lot of its time trying to understand what's just happened. And there's a lot of rubbish theatre made that's trying to copy Shakespeare and digest what's just happened. I'll give you another example. The Beatles. Regardless of if you like the Beatles or not, that's not relevant. They come along, they do their stuff, they do new and unique music, which is insanely popular. And look at the mess that pop music was in post, what would it be, 1970, it goes into this huge period where it doesn't really quite know what it's doing. And it only really recovered by maybe the mid-90s, creatively, pop music. It was a mess. Again, genius, that was one of the consequences of it. So I think he fits all the criteria of a cultural genius. Stick that up your nose. Also, in my opinion, that's the best possible introduction to occultism you could have. And if you're listening to this podcast in the future, when the Cult of Nick has billions of listeners, I will have sent you here to listen to that in order to explain to you why I spend any time at all on occultism. It's not because I necessarily believe in the supernatural. It's not because I necessarily think there's such a thing as telepathy or magic powers or gods or demons or whatever is because at core, what we're talking about is applied psychology. That's it. And, creative living. Well, you heard the guy. I mean, he makes it sound interesting, no? Okay. Also, as well, I'm just mentioning this. One of the weird things about that particular topic, occultism, you can't really talk about it on the radio in the United Kingdom because of UK broadcast laws, which still haven't really been modified as regards things like Jesus and his position as the only... I mean, if you look into it, it's mainly a hang-up for... listen, I'll waffle on the topic, but believe it or not, of all the things I've ever talked about in mainstream radio, that is the thing that I've had the most editorial difficulties with, occultism. People get their knickers in a huge twist about it, largely because it deals with religion. Yada, yada, whatever. Here's part 2 of the interview. Now, I believe this is the best possible explanation of Alan Moore's perspective of the film industry. Again, we had huge difficulties getting this on the air. I can't remember how much of it we even managed to broadcast. Partly because people have enormous difficulty understanding that this is Alan Moore's opinion of events. He doesn't name anyone, he doesn't get specific, he's just very clear that this is what he thinks is the case. And that's pretty crucial, really. But like I say, there's loads of bits we couldn't go with on air. And do you know what? Me and the team at Kerrang always wanted to put this out as a podcast in the form in which you're listening to it now, but never got round to it. And, you forget these things, don't you? Anyway, here we go. Alan Moore explaining why he hates films. Hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Words at the end. Welcome to the show. So you may or may not be aware, there's a big film coming out and it's called The Watchmen. They've been promoting it for ages and it's due out very soon. Now, I love comic books and this film is based on a comic book, one of the biggest comic books ever published, called The Watchmen. And the thing about turning comic books into films is that 9 times out of 10, the film itself is really poor and rubbish. And it gets me kind of almost like, I'm not an aggressive person, but I kind of get aggressively annoyed at how bad some of the films are. And the one that you may have heard me ranting about in the past, Night Before listener, is the Judge Dredd film, which makes me grind my teeth with rage whenever I think about it because it's so bad. So the Watchmen film is due to be out soon. It's based on a comic book. And the writer of that comic book, we've got him with us at the moment. His name's Alan Moore. Alan Moore, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to be here, Nick.
So, you must be over the moon. There's a big film, The Watchmen, that's coming out. It's based on a comic book that you wrote. I mean, it must be really exciting.
I don't think over the moon is quite the phrase that I myself would use. Under the ground, with my lack of enthusiasm, would probably be closer to the mark. I am incredibly curmudgeonly, and not without good cause, I think, about all of the film adaptations of my work. I haven't seen any of them.
You've not watched a single film?
Not a single film. I mean, I don't watch many films in general, but I decided early on that it would be much too painful an experience for me to watch any of the films that have been made of my work. I'm the last person who would be able to appreciate them.
Let me just tell the nation, for people who don't know, the films that have been made that are based on comic books that you wrote. There's V for Vendetta, there's From Hell, which has got Johnny Depp in it, and there's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which I actually walked out of halfway through. So those are the 3 sort of biggies, and you've not seen a single one of those.
No, and nor have I seen my first exposure to having my work turned into films would have been the Swamp Thing Returns film back in the early 80s, which was a ridiculous piece of B-movie trash, probably quite endearing to look back upon, which featured a lot of guys wearing rubber suits, sort of thrashing around in a swamp. Now, because the comic company had made a ridiculous deal with the movie company, they had basically signed a contract saying that they could actually, the movie company could use stuff from the comic book in perpetuity. Now, I think that the comic book people thought, perpetuity, is that a town in Kansas? And had just signed this blithely. So it meant that when the Swamp Thing movie people decided to make a sequel of this pretty much straight-to-video monster feature, they could use anything from the comic book, including stuff that hadn't been written when the original deal had been made, including my first work on Swamp Thing. And so they were able to take a couple of concepts, a few bits of my dialogue, which they mangled and made ludicrous, and this was my first exposure to seeing my work turned into a film, and it probably coloured a lot of the stuff that followed. And also, by the same contract, coincidentally, because I'd introduced in one of my issues of Swamp Thing a British occultist, a kind of wide boy South London British occultist called John Constantine. This enabled the film company to produce the Keanu Reeves Constantine movie that was out a couple of years back. I haven't seen any of these because all I'd be doing is looking at how my work was being turned into something that it wasn't meant to be, how it was being mangled, misrepresented. I mean, I decided early on that, yes, if people wanted to give me money for these films, that I'd take the money and I wouldn't be a fair critic of the film, so I'd just keep out of that. Right. I'd just keep a distance and maintain that my books are my books, the film is something else.
Okay, so you decided to do that, and you decided to take the money from it. So, I mean, the Watchmen film's coming out. You're going to be minted, surely. I mean, there's going to be so much money from that coming your way.
Well, this was back in the early days. I was in a much better mood with movies back in the day. I mean, I'm talking about, this is back in the 80s, when I thought, yeah, if they want to make the movies, I don't think that they're going to do a very good job of it, but I'll take the money. I remember meeting with Terry Gilliam. This was sometime back in the late 80s, because Terry Gilliam was supposed to be making the Watchmen movie. This is how long that they've been talking about doing it. And I sat and had a talk with Terry, as I call him, Tell, you know. We had a nice Indian meal together, and he said, how would you go about making the Watchmen into a film, Alan? And I said, well, if anybody had asked me, Tell, I said, I'd have told them that I wouldn't have done. Because I don't think that you can make Watchmen into a film. It wasn't designed to be a film. It was designed to be a comic. It was done specifically so that it would show off the things that comics are capable of and that comics alone are capable of. I mean, yeah, everybody knows that if you understand cinematic storytelling, you'll probably be a better comic book writer than somebody who doesn't. But at the same time, all you're going to do is cinematic storytelling tricks. You're going to end up with comics being films that don't move.
So
they're going to be a poor second cousin.
So you go for it to a nice Indian restaurant. You sat down with Terry Gilliam. He's going to make the film of the Watchmen. You're getting on well. You're calling him Tell. I mean, you're a good mate, right? And
I exaggerated with that. I called him Terry.
Right, and he goes to you. So, Alan, you know, I'm really excited. I'm going to make the Watchmen film. How can I possibly do it? And you say, well, the Watchmen is a comic book that's designed to be unfilmable. There's no way. You can't do it. It won't ever be able to be made into a film.
And Terry Gilliam, intelligent man that he is, I think that's the conclusion that he eventually came to. That's one that I read him saying in later interviews when he was asked about what had happened to the Watchmen film. So that was my stance at the time. Mm-hmm. And also at that time, I didn't really believe that any of these films would ever get made. I thought, hey, this is marvellous. The way it works is, me and the artist, we get paid these quite large amounts of money that are the option fees. It's basically saying, look, you can't sell this film to anybody else for 18 months or a year. And then if we're still serious about doing it, we might renew the option. And
so they have the option to make a film.
Yeah.
They pay you cash.
And then if the option expires and they haven't made the film, then that's fair enough. You've got the option money and you've got that in cash. It's non-returnable. And for me, this seemed like a win-win situation. I thought, this is great. I'm getting money and these films are never going to get made. That's a perfect result. I'm not going to have to see these films which are going to distort the stories that I was trying to tell. Mm-hmm. And that worked fine until they actually went ahead and made one of them, which was From Hell. And as soon as this became a reality, I thought, okay, well, how am I going to handle this? I thought, okay, I don't want to see it, but I don't want to give any offence to the people making the film. I want to make it just clear to them that their film is their film. I don't want to interfere with it, and I consider it as something separate to my book, and then that should all go all right. However, that seemed to be working okay until the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen film, when I had quite a horrendous set of circumstances. For one thing, I mean, I'd heard that the film was dreadful. Kevin O'Neill, who had been initially a bit more enthusiastic about it than I was.
He's the artist who worked on it.
He's the artist, the wonderful artist who works upon the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen with me, is the co-creator of the strip with me. He'd actually gone over to Hollywood. He'd gone to Prague, I think, where they were shooting the film before it was interrupted by flooding. And he'd come back with some very disturbing stories, where I think on the opening night, someone had said, well, what do you think of the film, Kevin? And because he'd got on well with a lot of the actors who were involved in the film, and he'd not wanted to say anything bad, he'd said, yeah, it was a good adventure film. Not the same as Alan and my book, but I suppose good for what it is. He was trying to let them down lightly. This got taken by one of the film's producers to the Ain'tItCool.com website and rewritten to be a fulsome paean of praise for just how much Kevin loved this film, which, of course, both of us were really angry about. This didn't get any better when we heard that somebody, a Hollywood screenwriter, was apparently suing 20th Century Fox and saying that he had given an idea to 20th Century Fox some years before, or he had sent it to them to see if they were interested in making it, which was about a group of Victorian fictional characters. And what he was basically saying in his lawsuit was that somebody at 20th Century Fox had decided to steal his idea, then had phoned me up, because apparently we're such good friends, and had said, listen, I want you to come up with this League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comic as camouflage for me stealing this person's ideas. And because I'm a complete stooge to Hollywood, I'd immediately said, yes, sir, I'll do it straight away. And all right, I could see this guy...
So you were part, in this lawsuit, you were part of a conspiracy?
Apparently, that I get my ideas from dopey Hollywood screenwriters.
Yeah.
That this was where I got my ideas. And apparently this was based upon the fact that none of the characters that I'd actually used in the League were in this guy's screenplay. They were, however, there were characters that the producers had worked into the film, like Dorian Gray and Tom Sawyer, that I believe had been in this person's screenplay. Now, perhaps he'd got a point. Perhaps the producers of the film had unscrupulously stolen ideas from him and then worked them into, the League film. I've no idea. But I went because, the suit wasn't against me. It was against 20th Century Fox.
Yeah.
I could have just turned my back upon it all. But I was so angered by the fact that this was somebody claiming that I got my ideas from other people and was claiming that I was connected with Hollywood, which is always a place that I've found loathsome. And particularly after our dealings with the people, with some of the producers on, or a producer at least, on the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen film, we were both completely sick of the way that people in that industry tended to behave, which, if anything, was worse than people in the comics industry. And that's pretty bad.
So what happened next?
Well, what I decided to do was, I thought, all right, at this point, I do not want my name on any more films. I do not want any money from any more films. For the things which I actually own the rights to, which is a shamefully small number, then I will simply not allow those things to be turned into films. Pure and simple. Now, on the books that I collaborate with, on the books on which I've collaborated with other people that I own, things like Lost Girls, or like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, or various other things, I decided that with them it wouldn't be fair of me to sort of take some ruinously principled stand
Right.
And affect their income. So I decided that I'd leave the choice entirely to them. The only person to take me up on it so far, bless her, is my darling wife, Melinda, who, as an American who grew up in California, it's always been her dream to have a movie made of her work. And she'd thought, well, it's all right for Alan to take this stance, but I don't know what I'd say if I was asked, which I left completely up to her. I've no desire to alter anybody's opinion, but she actually was offered the chance of an animated Lost Girls film, and she thought about it for 2 or 3 days, and she got a sense of sick dread descend upon her, and she suddenly realised what an animated Lost Girls film would look like. If all of those beautifully posed illustrations in Lost Girls, which has got a lot of erotic content, if they were suddenly all moving and jiggling about, and it wouldn't work. So she decided, no, she doesn't want a film made of Lost Girls, and bless her. But I took basically that stance. I went down, I was so offended by these aspersions that had been made as part of this guy's case, that I went down to this hellish 10-hour video interview in the depths of Soho, in an underground room, where there was a video link with some of the plaintiff's lawyers on the case, who were in America, and I was cross-examined for 10 hours. At the time, I was thinking, if I had kidnapped a school bus full of children and massacred them all after injecting them with heroin, I probably wouldn't have been interrogated for 10 hours. And during this, we found out that the main reason why the 20th Century Fox were probably going to lose the case was that one of the producers of the film, the same producer in fact, had sent joke emails, joke in inverted commas, joke emails to the plaintiffs saying that, yes, their story was true, that I had stolen the idea for the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen from their screenplay. I don't know what he hoped to achieve by this, and the idea of anonymous emails, I mean, even as somebody who is not hooked up to the internet and doesn't receive emails, I know that they are more traceable than a letter that you put into a postbox.
Yeah.
But he decided to do this as a joke. This only strengthened my resolve that I wanted nothing to do with Hollywood, and I didn't want to be thought of as somebody who was associated with it. That I didn't want people to see these films and think, well, I guess that's what the book must have been like. Or I guess that Alan Moore is comfortable with the way that these people hype these films up, the way that they merchandise them. So basically I said, all right, from this point on, I don't want any more money from films and I don't want my name on them. Within a couple of weeks of saying that, I had somebody from DC phone up to tell me the good news that they were making the Constantine film with Keanu Reeves. And so there was a little bit of money that would be going to the creators. So I said, well, look, I don't want my name to go on it. I want the money to be distributed amongst the artists.
That's quite a lot of money, though, wasn't it?
It was $75,000 or something like that. And so I said, share that out amongst the artists, and particularly make sure that Rick Veitch gets a cut that brings him up to the same as everybody else, because he wasn't going to get anything at all, and he was the person who first drew John Constantine back in his first Swamp Thing appearance. So I did all that, and it all seemed to go all right.
You must have bitten your tongue a bit, though. It's not a bad chunk of money.
Sorry?
You must have bitten your tongue a bit, though. Not a bad chunk of money.
Well, at first it was... yes, it did feel a bit strange to be doing it, and I thought, is this too mad even for me? But I became, I think, firmer in my resolve the further I went on with it. And certainly the Constantine film, it hadn't got my name on it. Apparently they weren't going to put anybody's name on it anyway. And the money was distributed amongst the artists. Everything was fine. Then they announced that there was going to be a V for Vendetta film. And I said, fine, send the money to the artist and take my name off the film.
Slightly bigger film, that, though, isn't it?
That was going to be a bigger film, but I thought, I don't want anything to do with it. I still feel the same way. So, yeah, take my name off the film and give my money to the artist. And they said, well, we won't be able to give your money to the artist unless you sign a piece of paper saying we can. And I said, well, I've got no problem with that. So they sent me some form. I signed it saying that all the money should go to David Lloyd, the artist on V for Vendetta. And then things went on. I assumed that it was settled. And I got a phone call from one of the Wachowski brothers who were making the V for Vendetta film. And he said he was really excited about the film and he wanted to meet with me. And I said, well, look, I mean no offence, but I'm not anything to do with this film. I've had my money given to the artist, and I've said that I don't want my name on the film. So no offence, I wish you the best of luck with it, but I am too busy on my own work at the moment, and I don't really see any point in meeting up with regard to a film that I'm not interested in and won't be going to see. You know, no offence, but this is my position. And he rang off, sounding a bit woebegone. And it was shortly after that I had a phone call from somebody asking me about this huge press release from Warner Films, from Warner Brothers,
right,
saying that the V for Vendetta film was coming out, that the Wachowski brothers and the film's producer, Joel Silver, were really excited about it. So was Alan Moore.
No way!
That Alan Moore was going to be meeting with the Wachowski brothers and Joel Silver because he was so excited about this new film.
No way!
Yeah, well, that was my reaction pretty much, Nick. It was...
So they put in a press release, Alan Moore's loving it.
Yeah. So what I did was to get in touch with DC Comics, who at that point I had been lured back into working for when they bought the company that I had signed contracts with. The independent company that I had signed contracts with, DC bought the whole company so that they could get my services back. And I'd been working under their auspices for a few years, and I'd kept my temper despite having been messed about by a kind of, apparently a vindictive DC management over a number of years. But I'd got it so that I was only doing one book for them. That was The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I'd said, yeah, you've been publishing that all right, and I am willing to let you continue publishing it as long as nothing happens to remind me that this is being published by DC Comics. If nothing reminds me of DC Comics' existence, then we should get along just fine.
Does that mean that they have to publish that comic without DC Comics written on it?
Well, yeah, they had to. I mean, we'd already got that sorted out because I'd come up with my own ABC Comics, America's Best Comics, which was the imprint that everything was published under. And I said, I don't want any DC adverts in these books. I don't want these to be associated with DC. Which that had worked up to a point for the 5 or 6 years that I was doing the ABC line, which included the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
How far did you push it? When they called you to talk to you, did they say, hello, I
wouldn't talk to anybody from DC. I would only talk to people from the company that I'd signed the contracts with.
Right, I see. Yeah.
Who were being kept on as a sort of subsidiary company by DC.
Gotcha.
So I was kept at arm's length from these people because I hate them.
Right.
And everybody knows that. And it was deemed not in everybody's best interests to have me exploding all over the place all the time. And like I say, up to a point, we'd managed that for about 6 years. And I'd said, all right, I'm willing to let you continue publishing The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen as long as nothing happens to remind me that this is being published by DC Comics. And they said, oh, well, we're certain that DC, they really value you, so they won't want to do anything to upset you. So as soon as I'd heard about this press release, I phoned up DC and I said, oh, this has happened. Now, this is a reminder that the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is being published by DC Comics, the people who sold my work to these movie people. So all I want, to put this right, is a small apology. Apology, clarification, and, a statement in a forum that is as big as the original press release. And it doesn't have to be a grovelling apology. All it has to say is, it doesn't have to say, we are fat liars, although that was in fact the case.
Yeah.
All they had to say was, due to a misunderstanding, we have reported that Mr. Moore said blah, 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 whereas in fact Mr. Moore's position is blah, 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 and we apologise to Mr. Moore for blah, blah, blah. It would have taken 5 minutes to write.
Mr. Moore's position is he hates DC Comics.
Yeah, well, all they had to said is that he is not associated with the film and he will not be meeting with its producers or the Wachowski brothers.
Yeah.
And I said, if you just publish that in a forum that is the same as the original announcement, then everything will be fine again. You can make all this go away. Just tell the truth. But they balked at that prospect. They said, well, you can have a little bit, one corner of the DC Comics message board. And I said, well, forgive me, that is not the same as a Warner Brothers press announcement. So, all right, I'm no longer going to allow you to publish The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Me and Kevin will be taking that off to publish with Top Shelf. and I still want that retraction and apology, and I also want assuring that my name is going to be taken off this film, because this is giving me some room for doubt. And at that point, DC was saying, well, no, we're not going to take your name off the film. And I said, but that was the understanding, surely, under which I signed away the money. You knew that that was the understanding. At which point, people at DC, including some that I still had some trust in, said, oh, well, I don't remember you saying that, Alan. And they were just lying to my face. So it got very bloody. I sort of said, okay, well, look, do what you want. I want my name taken off the film. If you don't take my name off the film, I want my name taken off all of the books. I said, I'm completely serious about this. This is how much it means to me and how little you mean to me. Take my name off of Watchmen. Take my name off of V for Vendetta. Stop paying me the money for them. And they said, well, we're not going to do that because obviously it's my name that's selling most of the books. So, all right, they're still going to... Oh, and frankly, that was a bit much. That would have been ruinous if they'd actually gone for that. But I was prepared and I meant it at the time.
Yeah, that's hardcore. That would have been a very significant thing to have happened.
So I sort of said, all right, do what you're going to do. I'll do what I'm going to do. And what that meant was that I got 18 months of interviews about the forthcoming V for Vendetta film, where I was explaining exactly what had gone on and generally spitting poison over the entire thing. They were still saying, right up until the last minute, that they weren't going to take my name off of it. Then I finally got a letter from Warner Brothers saying that, all right, legally they had to take my name off of it if I didn't want my name on it. So they got me to sign some other piece of rubbish paper to say that I was okay with them taking my name off the film. And the film eventually came out without my name on it, which was what I'd wanted. The money had gone to the artist. Although, thinking about it, I actually never did get a thank you phone call.
Right.
But there again, these things happen. So
now that's quite a lot of cash, though, isn't it? Because it's getting bigger. And then we get to The Watchmen, right? And The Watchmen, this is a huge film. I mean, it's bigger than V for Vendetta, which was a big film.
But it seemed at first that they had learnt their lesson with regard to what had happened with V for Vendetta. It got almost every article on V for Vendetta would be talking quite volubly about how I felt about the film. That was as big a news item, if not a bigger one, than the actual film itself, which can't have been what they wanted, and it wasn't what I wanted. If they simply hadn't lied about me, there'd have been no need for any of that. So I said, when the Watchmen film was being mooted, I said to Dave Gibbons, I said, look, I completely respect your position, Dave. I know that you're a much more enthusiastic person regarding this film than I am.
And he's the artist on the Watchmen.
He's the artist on the book. And Dave has always said that he would like to see a film made of Watchmen. And I respect his position. And I said to him, look, the way that this will have to go is that I want all of the money that I would get for the film to go to you, and I want my name taken off of the film, and I don't want to hear any more about it. And if I'm left out of this, and if I don't feel that there's anything, too bad going on, then I'll be content to just sit this one out. You won't have to go through... The filmmakers won't have to put up with all the bad publicity that they had to put up with V for Vendetta. I said, that's surely in everybody's interest, and Dave agreed. And he said, no, I don't think that they're going to be messing you about, and I think they're going to be happy to take your name off of it. And I wouldn't say they were exactly happy, but they did take my name off of it. right in the early days. And this was almost before I knew that the film was being made. But I did get a phone call from Steve Moore, who had not had any work from DC, who had written the novelisation of the V for Vendetta film and did an excellent job on it. He wrote this enormous book in a month because he's old school, you know. And but after I had violently parted company with DC, all of a sudden, a lot of my close friends from this country, particularly Steve Moore, suddenly stopped getting work, even though they'd been promised it. Now, that had meant a couple of very, very lean years for somebody who is my closest friend. And it was a way of punishing me, which I didn't really like very much. So, Steve phoned me up to say that he'd been approached by someone asking if he wanted to do the Watchmen video game. Somebody from DC, who the Watchmen computer game, if he wanted to write it. And they said, we haven't told Alan about this. And Steve said, well, look, actually, I've got a bit of work at the moment, and I'm too busy to do this. And anyway, I'd never dream of doing anything that you hadn't told Alan about. So I said, well, fair enough. But I was a bit angry that they had tried to use Steve to manipulate me, because what they were obviously intending to do was to present this as a fait accompli to me. What about the Watchmen computer game? You know, do you want to sort of kick up a fuss about this? Because that would mean denying your oldest and best friend work when you know that he's not had any work for a long time. And I didn't like that kind of manipulation. So I phoned up and I said, listen, actually, Steve's brother is currently terminally ill. Steve's having to look after him. He's doing a brilliant job of it. They're both doing a fantastic job of this difficult human task, which is a lot more important than the people who publish Batman comics. So I'd appreciate it if you didn't try to use Steve, particularly at this difficult time, as some kind of weapon of manipulation in trying to get me to do something. And they took that on board, and then I found out that, yes, there was the film coming up. And I realised belatedly, oh, that must have been why they were talking about the Watchmen computer game. Okay. Now, speaking to Dave, I said, all right, you know, if they just take my name off of this, send the money to you, then I will let this all go by. A little while later, I got a phone call from Dave saying, did I mind if they produced a facsimile comic book, Tales of the Black Freighter, that would be like the comic book that characters in the story, and presumably the film, are reading. It's a story within a story. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I think it doesn't sound like the best idea that anybody's ever had. It sounds like taking all of the counterpoint out of Mozart and releasing it in a record on its own. Mm-hmm. But if it's something that you want to do, I've got no objections, as long as there's something that says that I'm not participating in it, as long as my name's not on it. And Dave said, well, I think they were going to use the fictional authors' names instead of ours to make it a complete facsimile. And I thought about it for a while. I said, but that still won't make it clear that I'm not actually having anything to do with it and not participating in it, because I don't want any money for this, because this is obviously a film spin-off. So if you could just put a little piece on the... when I'd initially agreed to it, David said, oh yeah, the people at DC, they said you'd be quietly acquiescent. And I thought, are they thinking of the right person? Mm-hmm. Why would they think I'd be quietly acquiescent? Now, Dave said that he thought that was perfectly reasonable, having a tiny little box somewhere saying Alan Moore is not participating in this publication. and he'd go and see what he could do. Now, shortly before that, I'd had Steve Moore call me up again to tell me that after he'd done such a good job on the V for Vendetta film, they now wanted him to write the Watchmen novelisation. And Steve was phoning up to see if it was all right with me. And basically, just like with the V for Vendetta adaptation, it's always fine with me if it's getting Steve work. So I said, yeah, that sounds good. Then I had this conversation with Dave about this comic book spin-off where I'd said, well, they can do it as long as they just put something that says that I'm not participating. A little while after this, it seemed that DC weren't going to go ahead with this pirate comic after all. I got a phone call from Steve saying that all of a sudden it had been decided that there wasn't going to be a novelisation of the Watchmen film. Now, Steve had been really glad of that work because this is the year in which he expected to lose his brother. And the work would have given him a useful financial cushion against that eventuality. So he was saying, this is really good because it makes me feel a lot better about next year, that I've got this to fall back on. I got this phone call saying that suddenly somebody at Warner had phoned up and told Steve that no, they'd suddenly decided not to do a novelisation of Watchmen. And I suddenly realised what the people who'd been talking to Dave Gibbons had meant by, we expect Alan to be quietly acquiescent.
Man, this is so dark. This is so Machiavellian.
Yeah, and this was done with the knowledge that Steve is having to cope with a terminally ill brother. At that point, I became more furious with these creatures than I have ever previously been, and that is saying something. I've cut off all connection with the entire comics industry. Other than Top Shelf, I have nothing to do with the American comics industry, and it is such a weight off my mind to be finally done with that stuff.
Man, that's just the most Machiavellian, dark thing I've ever heard in my life.
It's the business world. Wake up and smell the brimstone. It's, I was a bit surprised by that myself. I've got a very low opinion of these people and have had for years, but to stoop to that depth. And frankly, I may be mistaken. Who knows? Maybe I'm misconstruing things. But actually, that is my perception of what happened. They have done things in the past and then lied about them and said that they haven't done them. They have done nothing to suggest that that is not what they did. So that is my perception of what they did. And in this case, my perception is rather the important one.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this, right? Final question on the Watchmen film. On behalf of all of the fans of your work, right, myself included, do we go and watch this film?
That is entirely up to you. I am an anarchist. I do not believe that I should be directing anybody's behaviour. That is entirely up to you. My reasons for not seeing it are that it was perfect as a comic book. That was how it was intended. It will not be improved by being translated to another medium. It will make it louder and flashier and probably perhaps more appealing to today's demographic audience. I don't know. Go and see it, but I would urge you, read the book first. And if you still feel the need to go and see the film after you've read the book, then I'm not stopping you, and I won't think any the less of you.
Maybe if I send you a copy of... I got it on pirate DVD, right? Maybe if I send...
No. I still won't be watching this. I will not be sharing your viewing pleasure, if pleasure there be.
I'll pop round, we'll have a cup of coffee, right? I'll get it on pirate, we won't spend any money on it.
Yeah, well, I did read something with the director early in the day where he said, well, the worst possible result, I think that Alan will look at this at his home in London, and he'll say, well, that's not too bad. And like when someone passed this quote on to me, I said, and like that is the worst possible result.
Yeah, you don't
that
live
he
in
can
London.
imagine. I mean, I don't live in London, and I'm never going to watch this thing. And it is better for him that I don't. Already, I mean, it just seems like such a pointless exercise that the complexity of Watchmen will not be evident upon the screen, because I was doing it so that you can get that complexity, because it's a comic book, because people can stare at the panels for as long as it takes them to understand all of the clever little things that are going on in the background, all of the clever little things in the dialogue. When you're in a cinema, or even when you're watching it at home, that stuff is all flashing past you at 24 frames a second. You haven't got the ability, like you have with a comic book, to actually check out all these little connections. And
yeah, because for the people who haven't read The Watchmen, it is one of those things where you start referring back and you're going, oh, hang on, that picture looks like this picture over here.
Yeah.
And it's quite a head-battering experience to read it.
And there were fake articles and stories and pieces of writing in the back of the book that told you a little bit more about the world of the characters and how the story was fitting together. It was, there are lots of things that we could only do in a comic book. And it was mainly about, as I said earlier, it was about the way that we were approaching storytelling, the things that we were doing to comic book storytelling. It's a bit like the recent Spirit film. Will Eisner's Spirit is one of the greatest comic strips of all time. And it is all about the movement and the arrangement of the panels on the page. It's incidentally about some guy in a mask who lives in a cemetery and fights crime, but that wasn't what Eisner's work was about. It was about comics themselves. And I think that's what Watchmen is about. I think it's what Lost Girls is about. It's what all of these things are about. And I think that making them into movies is futile, but I understand that not everybody sees things from my perspective. So what I'd say is read the works first, then decide if you still want to see the films.
It's Kerrang! It's the night before. Alan Moore, thanks for joining us on the show. I don't know if I'm going to watch it or not. I feel like I don't want to, but I feel like I want to as well, because I like the comic book, you know, and oh man, my head's in bits. Listen, Alan Moore, thanks for joining us, man. You're a friend of the show.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Nick. You take care of yourself.
There we go. And hopefully that made sense. And see, told you it was a good interview. And I don't know how many people will have managed to get to the end of this particular interview because, well, do you know what? I said I'd mention correspondence, you know, things people have tweeted at me and stuff like that next week, and I will. But I was having a conversation with Colif, I think is his name. I don't know. I was talking to someone on Twitter recently about the fact this was going to be a huge podcast, right? And he was saying, oh, you know, 2 hours, I'm going to have to listen to that whilst I'm sat on the bog or going to bed or whatever, right? And that's quite an interesting thing in that I've got a 50-50 split of listeners at the moment. And we got like half American listeners, hello, the majority of whom I guess are reading some of the profiles and articles that I'm writing on the disinfo.com website. And then the other half is a UK audience. And if that's you, if you're listening in the United Kingdom, I have to explain something to you here. I'm a huge fan of something called American Talk Radio. And the reason I'm describing it as American Talk Radio is because largely in the UK, talk radio is a kind of, quite it's tame, all right? It's a toothless tiger 9 times out of 10. And I don't mean that as an offence. There's some enormously talented talk show presenters in the UK, but you have enormous difficulties in terms of law, and there's all sorts of hurdles in the way when it comes to speech radio in the United Kingdom. Now, if you are listening in the UK, here's how you listen to talk radio. Yeah, I'm going to give you instructions for use, right? You don't sit and give it your full attention like you would a television show. You whack it on and you have it on in the background. And then every now and then ideas spring up into your mind and you think, oh, that's quite interesting. And every now and then ideas come along that you completely disagree with and you go, that guy's talking nonsense. Or every now and then you can't help but give it your full attention because suddenly something incredible's happening. But you listen to it in the same sense that you would listen to music radio. It's on in the background. It's not the main event like a television show would be. Now, US audiences are rolling their eyes now, probably going, what are you explaining how to listen to the radio for? Well, it's just how it is. There's no such thing really as UK speech radio. But there we go. We're going to change all that with the internet, right, guys? Hope you enjoyed the podcast. I'll get into some correspondence in next week's episode. In fact, in next week's episode, I'm not going to put anything out from my back catalogue. I'm not going to do any interviews or anything like that. I'm going to try and make it all entirely unique, new content, and we'll see how it goes. And if people like it, maybe I'll do a few more like that are not just back catalogue. Because I tell you what, it's a strange thing, but like quite a few people are downloading this now. I don't want to get into how many, but we're pushing it up. The figures are going up, and that's quite exciting in a way because it looks like we might actually get a radio show off the ground without being attached to a major corporation in any big way or strange, weird thing. Anyway, thanks for downloading it. Find me on Twitter. Talk to me there. We'll do some correspondence in the next podcast. And in the meantime, if you want to check out some of my newer material, I guess you'd call it, whack yourself onto the disinfo.com website. I wrote an article about something called The Awakening recently, which has gathered its own momentum. I think I mentioned it in last week's episode. I intend to record that and put it on the podcast, but that'll be next week, hopefully. All right, well done, everybody. See you next Tuesday. By the way, I watched The Watchmen. It blew me away. Absolutely amazing film. Totally dug it. Made me cry. I just daren't admit that in the main bulk of the thing. It was good. It's a good film. It is good.